So for the idea of language preservation, you could talk about language conservation, which would be a bit more like what we talk about when we talk about environmental rather than human objects that we want to protect. Like we might talk about, I don't know, elephant conservation. But you could still use that as a near cognate conservation, preservation. Um, Also, you could talk about language protection, but then you'd be imagining that the languages are under attack rather than are subject to a maybe a more general process of change and decay. Um, so the idea of preserving something is is putting it into a form where it won't be destroyed by natural processes. Um, So language preservation is trying to find ways to to stop languages from being destroyed or lost. Word, I think it's from French. It's about it is about leaves. So we often talk about the foliage is like all of the branches and leaves of a set of plants together.
So,
Um,
so foliage means leaves, yeah?
Yeah, and it's the leaves, but it's not just like individual leaves, it's the collective effect. All of them together um, is the foliage of that plant or of that that forest or of those trees. Um, so you're imagining here that it's dense, that is, it's hard to get through because there's so many leaves and branches in your way. Uh, Um, for the first question about racing against time, this is actually uh it's actually a verb preposition noun combination. You race against, you either race against other people or you race against time. Um, you don't have many other options for racing against. I'm racing against my friends. I'm racing against the fastest runners in the world. So you could name other individuals or groups, or you can say something more abstract. Racing against time, racing against the clock is sometimes used as a kind of metaphor for time or a stand-in for time. Um, so that's when we see racing against, we actually only have a few options there. And if there's no obvious person that you'd be racing against or group that you'd be racing against, it's got to be about time. Um, Now, this idea of the brink, again, this is a kind of phrase that almost always goes together. The something of extinction, if you see that pattern, it's got to be brink or edge. A brink is like the edge of something, a precipice. It's right before you fall. Um, so
And
um, a unique. So plot could either mean can either mean a plot of land or it can mean a kind of scheme or a plan, maybe usually a sinister one. So it doesn't really fit to combine it with on life, a unique scheme or plan on life, a unique plot of land or space in the land on life doesn't really work with that. Um, Whereas perspective on life, we often talk about unique perspectives. Um, that is something that if you use one language, you see the world in a slightly different way to any other language. Well, if we didn't have the French language anymore, we would lose um, 500 years of literature. um, and I think what they're getting at with linguistics, though, is not so much do we lose the text, it's that we lose a way of seeing the world.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of linguists believe that each language allows you to say certain things or to say them slightly differently to other languages. They talk about Inuit languages having 15 different words for snow. I don't think that's actually true, but if you can only speak English and then you say, oh look, there's some snow, whereas if you can speak a language where there are multiple words that are about different types of snow, you have a different perspective on snow. Okay, so I don't know much about the Amazon, but I know about Indigenous Australian languages. And I know that, for example, if you speak Yolngu language, they have 6 different seasons in the year. And they've got names for those seasons. So they don't have the wet and the dry season, which is a typical tropical way of describing things. They don't have winter, spring, summer, and autumn, which is more of a European thing. They have 6 different seasons with different names, and all of the connotations of those words give people who use them meaning. So one thing that would be lost is a way to describe living in that part of the world. So when you look at what's happening, why is it raining today and it didn't rain for 3 days? You'd have someone who can say that's because it's that season. And that language would be gone, so would that way of thinking about the world. I guess we can debate whether that's worth a lot of effort, some effort, or no effort to preserve. Your example of French is an interesting one because French, what gets called French now, was one dialect only. So that was one dialect, and basically the king and government in France said, from now on, this dialect is French, and everyone has to speak it. So the way that French was created was by destroying other languages. Same for many languages.
Yeah, correct. So racing comes with time and clock, and also with your friends, and we also
Yes,
have
if it's racing against.
if it is racing against,
Yeah.
and brink of extinction or edge of extinction, and perspective on life, which you also explained thoroughly.